Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter, Kyle Conn-Mullins. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
The RNC has kicked off this week, and arguably the biggest news to come out of Milwaukee is that former President Donald Trump, now the Republican nominee, officially selected his running mate. That person is Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. So obviously, in typical Forbes fashion, you estimated his net worth. But before we get there, I want to talk about his very humble beginnings. So bring us back to his childhood.
Absolutely. J.D. Vance's background is laid out in his memoir. That's what he became known for first and foremost. Hillbilly Elegy came out in 2016. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But his background is, like you said, it's a humble beginning. He grew up he's a self-described hillbilly, so hillbilly family in Middletown, Ohio, and also grew up parts of his childhood in Kentucky. Describes himself as growing up in the Rust Belt in Appalachia, and surrounded by people from that area, from that region. And it was a rough childhood. I've read Hillbilly Elegy a couple of times now, actually, and it is just anecdote after anecdote and story after story of, we're talking abuse, we're talking neglect, we're talking dropouts from high school, we're talking alcoholism, all sorts of places. The people around him are just not in necessarily good shape. He was raised by his grandparents. His dad was out of the picture pretty early on. His mom struggled with addiction, was in and out of different marriages, different houses, different rehab centers. We're talking about a very chaotic childhood. By the time he got to high school, he wasn't doing very well academically, and he moved in with his grandmother full time, and that's when things really started to turn around for him.
So let's talk about that pivotal turning point, because after high school, he did not go to college right away. He instead joined the Marines. So talk to us a little bit about his service.
Right. So after he moved in with his grandmother, things started to really improve for him. His grades improved, and he graduated with some better prospects. And he considered college, but kind of balked at the cost and enlisted in the Marines for 4 years instead. And he really credits the Marines with teaching him how to be an adult. He says that they, in addition to serving in Iraq, which is obviously going to be a major factor in anyone's life, he also, he says he was taught how to balance a checkbook and how to invest his money and save his money. He wasn't making a lot of money at the time, but he was able to make enough through a combination of Marines and online poker to pay for his grandmother's health insurance. And by the time he was out of his 4 years of service, where he never really saw active combat, he did public affairs roles for the most part. But by the time he was out of his 4 years of service, he said he was in a totally different spot in life.
So in that totally different spot in life, he then turned to college. So talk to us about his college career and eventual going into law school.
Absolutely. So he ended up going to the Ohio State University. I know it's important to say the Ohio State University. That's my understanding there. And he was working multiple jobs while he was there. He was there on the GI Bill that was helping him pay for it, so he didn't incur too much debt. But nonetheless, he didn't like it that much. He liked the fast-paced lifestyle of college, of going to class, doing all your assignments, staying up late to do stuff, hang out with people, all that. He liked all that. But he didn't vibe with the culture very well, and said that there were people, especially students, who were skeptical of the Iraq War, skeptical of his service, or disrespectful of it entirely. So he graduated in 2 years, took a bunch of extra classes, wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. And then he went to Yale Law School. That was really his first interaction with the upper echelon, the elites of American society. And when he goes to Yale Law School, it's a huge, splash water in the face, right? Totally different environment for him. And so it ended up working out for him, though. He, in addition to getting his law degree and setting himself up for a solid career in law and business, he also met his wife there, Usha. The two of them, met. She was he calls her his spirit guide at Yale, because she had also gotten her undergrad degree there. And then the two of them ended up clerking in Kentucky shortly afterwards, clerking for a federal judge there after law school. They got married, and then they ended up moving to D.C., where Usha actually clerked for then Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and J.D. started his legal career at a corporate firm.
So then let's talk about the book that really changed his life, and that is Hillbilly Elegy. Talk to us about what was in that book and what his career looked like then after.
So at this point, it's 2016. JD and Usha have moved now to San Francisco. She started a career at a corporate firm. He's actually pivoting to tech, was looking for something different to do. But he publishes Hillbilly Elegy, and it's this smash success. Reportedly, over 3 million copies sold across all different platforms and varieties. So really just an enormous success for him. Made him a lot of money, as far as we could tell. We don't know exactly how much, but we think it made him quite a bit. And it came out in the summer of 2016. This is right as Donald Trump was locking up the GOP nomination the first time. And a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, but especially people who lived on the coast, were looking for like an explanation of how did this guy come out of nowhere, and how does he appeal so much to this like middle America and the white working class. And JD Vance, in coming out with this book, kind of became a more genteel spokesperson for the white working class. Think about it, a guy who grew up as a member of the white working class, but then went to Yale Law School, married a daughter of immigrants. This is somebody who coastal liberals perhaps could relate to a little bit more, but could also talk about some of the issues that folks in middle America were facing, especially in the Appalachian region. So that was kind of how everything was framed for him. It ended up being an incredible success for him, and it unlocked a lot of doors. He pivoted eventually into venture capital. Got started at Peter Thiel's venture capital firm right after that, and that was 2016.
I mean, the story you're talking about, really a rags to riches story. It eventually was even turned into a movie directed by Ron Howard. Glenn Close was in it, as was Amy Adams. But you mentioned that it did open a lot of doors. Talk to us about how it opened a door into politics.
Yeah, so before I get to the politics, I'll just say he was also rubbing shoulders with other billionaires. I mentioned Peter Thiel. He moved back to Ohio, started a nonprofit, didn't go so well, Vance's nonprofit. So went back to venture capital, Steve Case's firm this time, and then started his own venture capital firm. But that clearly wasn't scratching the itch that he was looking for. He'd always been a bit of a political person. He was talking about Trump on CNN and then in the New York Times. But eventually he decided to run for politics himself. And he ran for Senate in 2021, 2022. The Ohio Senate race was an open seat. Rob Portman was retiring. And, it looked a little bit awkward initially because J.D. Vance had been an anti-Trump Republican for his whole public career. However, he had started to change, it seems like. His politics had seemed to shift. His messaging seemed to shift. And his first ad one of his first ads as a Senate candidate, he was asking viewers, are you racist? Do you hate Mexicans? And he was telling them that Joe Biden had left the border open so that fentanyl could flood into the country and illegal immigrants could vote. And I should state here, that's not accurate. But he was fully on board with the Make America Great Again messaging and agenda. He ended up getting Trump's endorsement. That helped him win the Republican primary, and then he beat Democrat, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name now, but he ended up beating the Democrat in that Senate race and winning a seat in the Senate.
It was Congressman Tim Ryan, and he beat Tim Ryan there.
Yes.
Yes, and so he beat Tim Ryan there, became the senator, was elected in 2022, and we'll get more into his politics in just a bit. But before we do, how much is J.D. Vance worth?
Forbes is estimating that J.D. Vance is worth about $10 million.
And where is this money coming from? Is a lot coming from Hillbilly Elegy? What are his assets? Break down the makeup.
So again, we just don't have a great picture of exactly how much he made from Hillbilly Elegy. We know roughly how many copies it sold, but book contracts differ, so it's just hard to know those numbers. What we do know is that his current assets, there's a lot of venture capital stuff in there, a lot of investments in different companies that he made when he was running his own venture capital firm, and some from even when he was, at other folks' venture capital firms before that. And then the other thing is he's got about $4 million worth of real estate. He's got a house in Cincinnati, a house in Washington, D.C., which he rents out, and a house in Alexandria, Virginia that he bought shortly after getting elected to the Senate. So Forbes' estimate is roughly $4 million of real estate, roughly $6 million of liquid assets from he and his wife's careers in the upper echelons of American business and law.
And as you mentioned earlier, he did have this political shift from being a Republican who did speak out about Trump. He did call Donald Trump reprehensible. He reportedly compared him to Hitler. Now he is the vice presidential nominee here. So talk about his politics a little bit. What type of Republican is Senator J.D. Vance?
First and foremost, at this point, he seems pretty loyal to former President Trump. I think that's the sort of defining feature. But he's also kind of a member of like the new right, kind of a rising coalition of younger right-wing folks. That's characterized by a couple different things, but I think most characterized by Donald Trump's vision for what the Republican Party should be. He's actually cuts a little bit more of a populist figure when it comes to economics. So he's expressed some openness to like anti-monopoly measures and regulation. Those are things that typically only Democrats are on board with. On foreign policy, he's also kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, he's been one of the most outspoken opponents of aid to Ukraine. But on the other hand, he's very much a hawk on China, Iran, Israel, Palestine. On social issues, I would say he's very socially conservative, definitely in favor of restricting LGBTQ rights, restricting abortion access. He's talked about how women who are in abusive marriages should probably just stay in them for the kids. These are sort of controversial comments that he's made in the past on social issues. And on immigration, I think that's another defining issue. He's again a hawk. He wants to build the wall. He wants to shut down the border, and he wants to send in the U.S. military to police the border and maybe even launch strikes into Mexico. So we're talking about a very conservative figure here, but more than anything else, someone who's aligned with Donald Trump's vision for the future of the Republican Party.
And from what it seems like, I mean, he is the heir apparent because he's only 39 years old compared to Donald Trump's late 70s. So Kyle Mullins, per usual, it's always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Brittany. Always great to talk to you.